What's good, team? Welcome to another Small James coding tutorial where today we're going to be building an e-commerce store, a full stack e-commerce store using NextJS 13, TailwindCSS, Zustand for state management, and Stripe for billing and transactions. It's an absolutely massive tutorial as NextJS have released a whole lot of changes with their latest version. They're all absolutely phenomenal, so I definitely recommend jumping on the bandwagon, and we'll be putting them all to good use inside of this e-commerce store. You can see it's a fully responsive page. Looks great. We have a little cart modal. We can click on a product. We get routed to a secondary page. We can add the item to the cart. We can add it multiple times. Come back to the home page. Navigate to the Orchard of Apples. We can add that to our cart. 3 items in our cart. Everything looks brilliant. And then at the end, we have a fully functioning checkout. So we can click on the checkout button just here. That takes us to a Stripe checkout page with all of our products, and we can test this out, fill out some demo information right here, pay, and it's going to successfully purchase all of these premium fruits, take us to a successful checkout page, and we can route back home and do the whole thing all over again. You'll be able to view all of these transactions inside of your Stripe page, so that all works too. And at the end of it, you'll be an absolute master of all of the latest and greatest features of Next 13. Anyway, that's it. Time to get into the code. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like and sub. Helps me make heaps of these tutorials. And without further ado, let's sell some fruit. So to get started, we're going to begin inside of our terminal, and we're going to be in the project directory of our choosing, and we're going to type npx create next app at latest, and we're going to give our project a name. So that is going to be NextJS 13 store. If we hit enter, we're going to get some configuration to do inside of our terminal. So we're not going to be using TypeScript for this. We will go with ESLint. We will not be using the source directory. We will use the experimental app directory. This is part of Next 13's new features. We'll keep the alias the same. And now we're going to have our project configured for us. And now that that is all finished, we can cd into that project directory. So cd into NextJS 13 store. And we can go ahead and open this up inside of our Visual Studio Code editor. So now that we have that open, let's just take a second to look at what we're actually working with. A lot of this looks standard to Next.js. However, there are a couple of things that have changed in Next 13. One is this app directory that we selected to use. This is instead of having like the pages, the components, the source directory, all this kind of stuff. It's now all done inside of this app directory. Inside of our app, we have a couple of files. The most notable ones are the page.js, the layout JavaScript, and the global CSS. We'll kind of dive into this more later, but the page and the layout are reserved file names that do specific things inside of this app folder. And obviously, since the pages directory is gone, now the routing is going to be done directly from our app component, and where typically we would render the index.javascript file for any folder directory level within this folder, now it's going to be looking for the page.js. So in this root level directory, the file that's going to get rendered is this page.js, all this content right here. And the layout.javascript is the second reserved file. There's a couple others that we'll be making later, and this is just going to wrap our app, wrap our page.javascript file and any sub pages that we define. And so this is where we'll soon make our header and footer and stuff like that. But what we're going to do in here is open up a terminal inside of our Visual Studio Code editor, and we're going to come over to this Next.js documentation page just here to initialize Tailwind with our project. The link to this page will be in the description down below, so be sure to check that out if you're looking for it. And we're just going to copy and paste these commands directly into our project. Super simple. So we'll copy that one, paste it in and run it. On to the next one. So now we're going to have to copy this content and update the tailwind.config.javascript, replace this content tag. And since we're not using the source directory, we can get rid of these lines just here. The next thing we're going to do is come into our global CSS and replace everything in here. So we can get rid of all of that and replace it with these 3 lines of code. And finally, we're good to boot up our project. So we'll type npm run dev, and that's going to start up on localhost 3000. In my case, it's going to be localhost 3001 because I already have something running on localhost 3000. So here we have our boilerplate code that I mentioned is inside this page file. We're just going to go ahead and gut all of it. We don't need any of this information. Nice and empty. And what we're also going to do is get rid of the styles input just here. We're going to remove the class name on this file, And we're just going to go ahead and delete this modular CSS file because we're not going to need any of those in our project. And now in here we can test if our Tailwind is working by typing background green 200 and giving the page a min height of the screen. And we can see that our document does indeed change, and so that is working perfectly. So just like that, we have Tailwind CSS working inside of our Next13 project. The next thing we can do is apply some font families to our entire project. And as I mentioned, the app is kind of the main entry point for all of our componentry. And this file is wrapped by this layout.javascript file. So here, the children is going to be everything that is inside of these main tags. And so what we're going to do is start off by styling the body of the document. Instead of giving this background green and min height of screen, we're actually going to give the body a minimum height of the screen, a display of flex, and a flex direction of column. And the first thing we're going to do in here is apply a Google font family. So NextJS 13 has added an excellent feature that means we no longer have to worry about the import link tags to get Google Fonts available inside of our project. Instead, what we can do is wrap this class name inside of the curly parentheses. And just like we have in here, we have this enter and this import, this font import from Google Fonts. We're going to go ahead and paste this inside of our file just here instead. And now what we can do is we can target enter, and we can access its class name, and we can append that to the end of our typical class name, our Tailwind CSS styles, ensuring that you leave a space between the last style and the enter class name. So now if we refresh the page, all of our text in here should experience that font family, and we can see that it does indeed. So that is nice and neat. We also note here that we have some metadata, so while we're in here, we may as well just update this. This can be the name of our store, which is going to be Fruit Shop, just like that. If we take a look, that has updated up the top just there, and the description could be whatever you wanted it to. So we might say hyper-inflated fruit store, best prices 2033. So now the next thing we're going to do is start adding some header and footer components to our page. And to do that, we are going to add some more styles to this body tag. The first one is going to be a relative style, just like that. Then in here, we're going to define a header tag. Beneath the children, we're going to define a footer tag, and we're just going to wrap the children inside of a div, and we're going to give this div a class name of flex1, and that's just going to push this footer content to the bottom of the page. So if we're occupying the full height of the page, we can see that this content exists down here, right there. You can just see it. So that's at the footer of the page. So that is nice and neat. For the minute, what we're going to do is just write footer in there, and we can put header up the top. So there we have the header, and we're going to start off by styling the header and give this a class name of sticky. We're going to set top to 0. We're going to give it a padding of 6, a background of white, a border bottom, border solid, border blue 900, so that should show up just down there, which looks good. We're also going to give it a shadow of medium, so that it has a little bit of a shadow on the rest of the content. We're going to give it a Z index of 50, and then we'll add some text sizes. So the default text size is going to be 2XL. On a small breakpoint, we're going to increase it to text 3XL, and then on medium text 4XL. And finally, on a small, we're going to increase the padding to 8. So as we get bigger, that will increase. So we get that large header up there. So that is all good. We're also going to take this opportunity to add a head tag up the top of our document right here. And we're going to use this to import a Font Awesome CDN package so that we can use Font Awesome icons in our project. So once again, the link for this will be in the description down below, and we're going to copy this link tag and paste it in the head of our document. And we're just going to have to update the cross origin and referrer policy to have the P capitalized and the O capitalized. And that's going to allow us to come over to Font Awesome Icons, look up the cart icon, and select the shopping cart just here. We can copy this icon and paste it inside of our header component. So if we just open that up, we'll have a header that just says fruit shop and H1 tag. And then after that, we can paste this icon updating class to say class name. So if we come back to our document, we can see that here we have Fruit Shop, and now we have our Font Awesome icon displaying. We're going to add a flex and style to the header. We're also going to add item center and justify between, so that's going to push the cart to the other end of the page. For the H1, we're going to give it a class name of uppercase so that it's fully capitalized. We're also going to give it a cursor of pointer and a hover, scale 110. So that way when we hover over it, it goes cursor and gets a little bigger. And while we're at it, we're going to come into our global CSS file, use the asterisk selector to select every element in our page and just give them transition duration of 200 milliseconds. So now when I hover over this, it just is a bit slower. So that's looking pretty good. The other thing we're going to do with this H1 element in our header is actually wrap it inside of a next link tag, just like that. So you have to make sure that that gets imported up the top of your document just here. And we're going to wrap this H1 tag in the link tag and provide an href to it. And that is just going to bring the user back home. So whenever they click Fruit Shop, it's going to route them back to this home page. As for the icon, we're going to give this some styling. We're going to give it a cursor of pointer. We're going to give it a hover state of text slate 500. So on hover, it's going to change color, and we can see that in play just there when I hover over the icon. So that hover state looks real nice. And then if we come back into our main page, the file that gets rendered inside of our layout at the root level directory, the root level route just here, so the / directory, we're going to remove this content, give this main a padding of 4, just like that, and we will come and add some content to that in just a second. So at this point, we're about ready to start adding some products to our fruit shop. And to do that, we're going to come over to stripe.com. We're going to go over to their dashboard. You may need to log in or create an account. We're going to come up here, add a new account. It's going to be called Fruit Store. We'll create that account. And once that's created, that's going to bring us over to a home dashboard just here, where the notable features that we're going to be looking at, one is this developers section just here. And the second one is this live content. So here it says test mode. We're currently in test mode, and you will need to make sure that test mode is enabled for you. Only when you deploy your project, you'll want to enable live mode. So live will actually start billing and processing your transactions. So for testing and development, this should be in test mode. Obviously, you'll need to access your account to access the live data, but that's pretty straightforward. And the first thing we're going to do is come into our project directory and create a .env file. We'll also want to make sure that inside of our get_ignore, we have the .env local there, so that our .env does not get pushed to any public repositories. And in here, we're going to create a Stripe secret key is equal to, and we can find that inside of our account by coming to the developers tab, over to API keys, and here we have 2 keys. The one we're going to be needing to copy in is the secret key. So you want to click reveal secret key and copy the entirety of that key over and paste it just in here like that, save that file, and then close that file. So I just did exactly that, saved my secret key inside of the .env file, and that's going to mean we are ready to install Stripe. So we can go ahead and install the API by typing npm i stripe. That will add that to our package.json file. We can see it right here. And we can actually go ahead and experience the first really cool feature in Next 13, and that is getting the static information. So historically, for something like this, we would have used get static props. We no longer have to do that. We don't have to use any user effects or use state to handle loading data in server side. We can actually just define an asynchronous function that is called get stripe products, just like this, and we can turn our home page into an asynchronous function as well, and we can say const products is equal to and call that function. This will be pulled in asynchronously server side before this page actually gets rendered. By default, all pages are server rendered in Next 13. Means that they are extremely quick. The data is loaded instantaneously. We avoid having any client-side rendering, so it's unbelievably easy to load data into your pages. And all we have to do in here is say const stripe is equal to new stripe. This will need to be imported at the top of the document, and we can then pass in process.env.stripe secret. Just like that, we're going to provide a backup of an empty string, then a comma and a secondary argument, and this is just going to be the API version, which is going to be 2020-0827. That's going to initialize Stripe inside of this function server side, And then what we can do is we can say const res is equal to await stripe.prices.list. And inside of this list method, we're going to pass an object, and that's going to have one key expand with the value as an array that is just data.product, just like that. After that, we can access all of our products, so that's going to be res.data, and we can just return the prices, and this will be accessible as products in our actual components. Unbelievably easy. That's all it takes to fetch data from the Stripe API with this new Next13 syntax. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. So with that done, we're actually going to have to add some products to our store. We're going to come into this products tab just here, click add a product, and the first one is going to be a bunch of bananas. I've already preloaded the images. If you want to use the same images, they'll be linked in the description down below. We're going to save all of these to our local device, and that means that inside of here, we can just upload the images directly. So bunch of bananas is going to be right here. I've already saved them all to my device. We're going to give this a description. It's going to say a bunch of beautifully ripe and healthy bananas. We're going to come down. There's additional options here. We don't really need any of that information for this. We're going to make sure that the price information is one time. The bananas are going to be $37 because of inflation at the moment. Everything is very expensive and we want to remain competitive. We're going to save that product. That is our first product. And then we can come back to the products, add a second one. So we'll add a product. This one is going to be an orchard of apples. We'll upload the apples images just here. Fresh, and more fresh and crispy apples. Exclamation mark. These should all be lowercase. Just like that. These ones are going to be $150, and we're going to once again make that a one-time purchase. We can now save that product, and then we can add the final one, which is going to be the premium pineapple. Just like that. We can get that image, the pineapple. This one is going to be, it's basically like drinking fruit juice, but healthier. Exclamation mark. We're going to come down once again at one-time pricing. This one's going to be a flat $1,000. Save the premium pineapple, and now we have our 3 products. We can see them all here. And now what we can do is they will be accessed by this code just here. And we could go ahead and console.log products right here, just like that. And now we can boot up our project. And since this page is still server rendered, we would expect to see this console on our server side, not actually in the browser or the client. So we can go ahead and run that, come over to our page just here, the fruit shop, reload that. That did not work. And that's because it's gone to a localhost 3000. I closed my other application. And we can see that that returned a promise, and that's because we have to make sure that we await that. So let's reload this page. And now we actually get the products just here, and that is all showing up, so that's absolutely brilliant. We can see we have fresh, and more fresh, crispy apples. And now what we can do is actually create 2 more components, and once again, these have reserved names, so you cannot just randomly name components like this unless they have this particular purpose. The first one is going to be loading.js, and this is still in the root level app directory. And in here, we're going to export default function loading, just like that. And this is going to be a component, a special component that will once again wrap our app similar to the layout, except it acts in the same way as the new suspense tags in React work. So basically they check for any promises in the children content, and if they do, then this page gets displayed. So if I refresh this page, we can see that while we're loading that data, this page by default automatically gets rendered right there. I could change this to have a whole lot of stuff, and it just is absolutely amazing. Our loading behavior is all handled, and we don't have to fuss with having a loading state inside of our app. It's just all absolutely seamless. So absolutely brilliant. The other thing we're going to do is, when we fetch data, we would typically handle an error state, and we can do that as well. This is also a reserved component name, so error.javascript. This one is a client-side component, but it's going to be very similar. Export default function error, and in here we're just going to return div that says error ... Bummer. And so because this component is, instead of being rendered server-side like our loading component and our layout and pages, this one is server-side. To make it server-side, we just add a little syntax up the top that says use client, just like that. We're going to wrap it inside of the quotation marks, double quotations. We can see that's exactly what the error message says just here to do. And we can save that. And if we have any errors pulling our data, then we will instead just display this error component. So once again, Next13 absolutely nailed it on the loading, fetching API data and error states and all that good stuff. So now that we have our products available inside of our actual component, we can go ahead and start styling it. And so this is going to have a style of grid cols 1. On a small screen breakpoint, as we go larger, we're going to go to a grid cols 2. So that's going to be a double grid column. And then on the third one, we're going to go on a medium breakpoint, we're going to go to grid cols 3, and that should say cols 2. And here we're going to have our first component, so we can go ahead and define a component right here. This is not going to have a reserved name, so it's just going to be a typical component. This one is going to be product card.js, and here we can use the RFC component trick to get that component up and running. This is going to receive some props, and we can import that in here by just accessing the product card that gets imported at the top. And we can see that in this console of what products is, it's an array. And so that means we can map out our product cards just here. We can use the curly parentheses to map over the products array. So we'll say .map, we'll get the product and the product index. We'll open that up, and then we'll return actually the product card. We'll make sure we give that the key equal to the product index. Super simple. And then we'll just pass the product down as it is. Product is equal to product. We can save that once again, reload this page. We can see that our product card gets rendered 3 times on our page. So that looks awesome. That should also be grid cols, not grid col. And the other thing I'm actually going to do while I'm in here is just wrap this main inside of a div and give this the grid classes just there. Paste that in there, and instead in this top level component, I'm going to give this flex and flex col. And the reason I'm going to do that is so that I can define a max width on this element. So that's going to be 1000 pixels. We can set the width to full and the MX of auto. And that just means that when we come onto our large page, our products will self-center and they won't just continue to get ridiculously large. So inside of our product card, now what we can do is destructure the product from the props, and we should be able to do some styles to the product card. From here, we're going to want a second level of destructuring. This one is going to have some more information. So we're going to destructure stuff out of the product. So if we come and have a look at the stuff down here, the information we're going to need is the ID. So this is going to be ID. We're going to rename it, give it a new alias. So that's going to be price underscore ID. We're also going to destructure out the unit amount, which is just down here. This is the actual price that we specified in Stripe for the product. We're just going to label that cost. And finally, we're going to get the product itself. So that's this whole object just here. And we're going to call this product info. So now that we have access to this information within our card, we can go ahead and start styling the card. And we're going to start off by giving it a flex and a flex col, display a flex and flex direction column. Easy breezy. We're also going to give it a shadow, a background of white, and a hover state that gives it a shadow of large, and finally a cursor pointer. As for the content in the page, we're going to be using the image tag where the source is equal to product info.images, and it's the first image in that index. We're going to give it an alt equal to the name, which is something that we're going to have a third layer of destructuring. So we're going to destructure the name and description out from product info. So now we can put the name just in there, easy breezy. We can close that image tag. We're going to give it a class name equal to width, full, height, full, and object cover. So that's pretty straightforward. We can see that these images load into our page perfectly. So that's excellent. We can access these images. We're also going to want to make sure that we have a gap between the cards. So we can do that just in here. We'll give this a gap of 4. That's going to spread the cards out a little bit. And now underneath the cards, we can have a div with a class of flex and flex column, and a gap of 2 and a padding of 4. And in here, we're going to have a div that has a class of flex items center justify between. That's going to have an h3 tag that has the name. So we should see that pop up just below, bunch of bananas. And at the other end, what we're going to do is have a paragraph that has the cost divided by 100 because the cost is specified in cents. And we can just put the $ key in front of that. Underneath both of these, we're going to have a paragraph that is the description. Easy breezy. So now we have the description, and I'm just going to make the description have a class name of text small, so that the text is just a little bit smaller than everything else. And now if we inspect this, we can see that, it looks good on all screen sizes. We have our different products, and we'll just want to add a cursor pointer that just needs to be fixed to pointer up there. So now we have these images that looks excellent. Our 3 little product cards. The next thing we're going to do is define an on-click handler, and that's going to route us to a new page. Now in this particular instance, we're not going to be using the link tag for our routing, and that's because we're going to have some other functionalities in an on-click handler that we want to define. However, the link is brilliant for main links because it's great for search engine optimization. So if you've got different pages and stuff, but for a product specifically, it's not as important. So in here, we're going to define a function. It's going to be on-click handler, or we could even be on product click, be a bit more specific. And in here, what we're going to do is say router.push, and we're going to push to a new route. For this, we're going to have to import router. Now, it used to be from NextRouter, but the import has updated. So now it's actually from next/navigation. So we'll define our router up here. Const router is equal to use router, just like that. And then we can have the router component. Save that. Now here we're getting an error. If we look in the console, it will tell us exactly what the error is. I'll refresh that page. And it's saying that use router only works in client components. And so because this component can be a client component, we can just add that use client at the top. And now we refresh that page. Happy days, everything is perfect once again. So we can push to a new route, and that means that we're also going to have to create the route. So we can do that in here by creating a new folder. This one's going to be called product. And in product, we can create a new file, page.js, and it's just going to be that main page export. In here, we can say export default function product page, just like that. This is going to be the function that gets exported, and in here we can just return some JSX, so we can return a div that just says hello for the second. And what we're going to do is we're going to push to product slash, and then we're going to actually change that secondary slash to a query, and it's just going to be price ID, just so we can see how this stuff works. And then we're actually just going to add the price ID right there. We can assign this onClick to this top level card. OnClick is equal to onProductClick. And so with that done, we can save this page. This onClick has been assigned to the onProductClick. Come back in here, and if we click on a product, we can see that the router does reroute us. It pushes the new route. It's the product route, and we get the price ID as a query parameter. And if we click on one of these images just here, we now get the price ID as a query, and we can go ahead and access that inside of this product component or this page by receiving the props just here. And inside of here, we can destructure search params from the props just like that. Let's make sure we spell that correctly. Params. And we should once again be able to console.log the search parameters. So if I save that page and we look down here, we can see that we do in fact get the price ID, so that is super neat. We can go ahead and destructure out the price. ID is equal to props. So that's just one way you can do it. If you wanted to have dynamic routes, here we've had the information saved in a query parameter. If you wanted to have a path parameter, you can have dynamic paths by just circling any new folders inside of a curly parentheses. And so this would just be your variable name that you would destructure in the exact same way. So super straightforward to have dynamic pathing. Here, as I mentioned, we just want the price ID. The other thing we're going to do at this point is initialize a global state for our project. And we're going to use Zustand for that. And we're going to essentially set a product that we select to our global state and then read it in our second project. And so for that, we are going to create a new folder. And this one is going to be store. And we're going to do this inside of a curly parentheses, because the curly parentheses means that the app folder will not recognize this as a route, and it will not look for, any paths or components or anything like that within it. And in here, we're going to make a new file called store.js. We're going to quickly kill our server and type npm install Zustand. Zustand is absolutely amazing, lightweight global state manager. You can even use it with like persist methods to persist to the local storage. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to say import create from Zustand inside of the curly parentheses. And we're going to say const use cart is equal to create, open that up. And this is going to take a callback function that has a set and a get method, open that up in a function. And here we return the state. So that's actually incorrect. We're not going to open it up. We're just going to return an object, return an object store. And in here we can have all of our parameters. So the first example might be the cart. We can define it like that. It's going to be a list of all of the products and the quantities. We're also going to have a product that gets selected. That's just going to be an object. And then after that, we define a whole lot of methods that are going to be used to interact with our store. So it might be add item to a cart. And that's just going to be a function. Make sure we have a comma after each entry. In here, we're going to accept params. And what we can do in here is destructure the new item is equal to params. And then once we have access to this new item, we call the set method. The set receives the current state and we return a new state because the state is immutable. So we can't mutate the state directly. We set a new state that's like a version based off the original state. So in here, what we're just going to do, we're going to return, spread the old state, and we're just going to set cart equal to a new array. So we'll say const new cart is equal to, we'll do that inside this function, spread state dot cart, and then add on the new item. So we create a new array and then we set cart equal to that new array. So that's super easy for the add item to cart. We've got a couple of other ones. We might also have remove item from cart. It's going to be very similar. We're going to take params, open that up. We will const destructure out the item index for that, that we're going to remove. Say is equal to params, and then we'll once again call the set method, take the state, open that up, and return a new state. Cart is equal to new cart. And here we can just do exactly as we have above and define the new cart. With a new cart in this instance is just state.cart.filter. We use the filter method. We'll take the element, we'll take the element index, and we just want to make sure that we return element index is not equal to item index. So basically, every other entry will return true. This one entry that we're trying to remove will return false, and that will be removed from our cart. The last one we'll do is empty cart. So that one's going to be especially simple. We don't really need anything. We can just copy all this logic once again. And in here, we can just not receive anything and just say new cart is equal to an empty array and set that. So that is extremely straightforward. As for the product, we're going to add one up the top. So we'll say set product, and that is going to once again be the similar syntax we've been using. We'll have the params, and here we'll destructure out the new product is equal to params. And now we'll just call this set method, except this time we're going to be updating the product with the new product. Super easy. So just like that, we have our store configured. We have to make sure we export default store, use cart, just like that. So now we can access it in other components. And then we can come to our product card and we can set the state to the product that we have selected. So what that's going to look like is first we have to access the function. So we're going to say const set product is equal to use cart. We import that into our component from our store. It is a method that we can call. We access the state and we return state dot the name of the function. So in here, this was just set product. So this is going to give us access to the set product term, or this function, and now we can actually call it set product, and we can pass in the product just here. So we're going to define it, const new product is equal to, and this is going to be an object, and in here we're just going to set this object. And so that is going to be name, description, price ID, cost, and I think we'll also need the product info. So that's pretty straightforward. That's got all that information that we're going to need. And now we can just set the product to the new product just here. And that will set this product to our state and then reroute us to a new page. So if we save that and come to our home route and obviously restart our application, refresh the page, we reload the home route and we click on the component, we get re-navigated, except now we should have set that state. And now inside of our product, we can go ahead and access that set product. So we can say const product is equal to use cart, import that from our store, access the state, and we can just return state.product. And assuming our set method worked correctly, this add set product, assuming this worked correctly, then we should have access to that product in here, because that's what this will become. So let's just try and see if we can console.log product. Let's see if that works for us. We got an issue, and that's because this is a server rendered component, whereas this actually has to be a client rendered component. We don't need this to be loaded from the server, so we're just going to add the use client to the page just there. Let's do that once more. We click on Orchard of Apples, and we can see that we don't get anything back, but if we look inside of our console, we actually console out the object. So that is awesome. And there it is all right there. We have the cost, we have the name, the description, and the product info where we can get everything else. So that has worked, better, above and beyond perfectly. We now have a global state that we can manage from or access from any of our pages, set and update that. So that is phenomenal. We're also actually just going to add one more entry just here, and this is going to be open modal. And that's just going to be set to false, and we're going to set a method for it. So set open modal, and that is going to be set state, and we're just going to return spread the state, and the open modal value will just be whatever it's the inverse of what it currently is. So this should just have the open close, or the inverse, the Boolean value of the open modal, and this will be for when we have our checkout page. So this is just going to be open modal. So it's pretty easy. But anyway, back to the story. So if we come here, we click on the pineapple page, and we have access to all of that information. So that is absolutely cash money. And so the only downside with this implementation that we currently have is that if we refresh the page, we see that we lose access to that store. So in here, what I'm going to do is just write an if check, and it says if not product.name, so we don't have access to the name of the product and consequently the rest of the product. Then we're just going to say window.location.href is equal to home, and that's just going to send the user back home. So if I refresh this page, it sends us home again. We load the images, we come back, we have the information, we refresh the page, it sends us home. So that is all good and working. So now once we're on this information page, we can just quickly go ahead and style it. We're going to need a couple of things. So the first thing we're going to do is actually just access all of the information. And we're going to do that essentially how we've done it here. So we can just destructure everything out of this product. We already have access to the price ID, so we're not going to double up on that one, but we will make sure that we get the name, the description, and that should be pretty good for the minute. In here, what we're going to do is give this a class of flex column. And actually, that's a lie. We're going to go grid and grid cols2. And actually, that's also a lie. We will go flex and flex column. And inside here, we're going to have a div, and this is going to have a class of grid cols1, and then on a medium screen, we're going to bump up to grid cols2. And we're also going to give this a max width of 1,000 pixels. So we put the variable amount inside of the square parentheses, and then we're going to give it an MX of auto so that it self-centers itself. So in here we can have a div. This is going to wrap the image. So we can have an image tag. This is going to have a source exactly as it did in here. So we could just go ahead and copy this directly. So we can, as I mentioned, we can just paste that straight in there. So that should show our image. Let's see if that works. That is not accessing it for us. Cannot read images. Let's just see if we can console.log product info just here. See what that gets us. So I'm going to go back to the fruit shop. Let's come clear the console log. We click in there. We actually get an issue. And that's because that is undefined. And that's because I'm a Muppet. We actually don't want this weird syntax just here. We just want to destructure these values specifically. We don't want to rename them with aliases. So if we do that once more, we load our page, we click through, we access the image, that shows up, that looks awesome. Now underneath this div just here, for this div, we're going to give this a padding of 2 and a shadow so that it just sits around it. And I'm actually going to make sure that that only happens on a medium screen. So on those breakpoints, we'll have that. Underneath this div just here, we're going to have a second div. This is going to have a class of flex col gap2. And we're just going to have all the information. So we'll have an h3 that will just have the name. Under that, we're going to have a paragraph that's just going to have the cost. So it'll be cost divided by 100. And then underneath that, we're just going to have a class of text small for our description. So that's kind of all of our information just there. We'll want to make sure that this is padded in a bit. So we'll say P4. We get a padding of 4. That's all good. I might also just do one last thing. This is going to have a div in here with a class of flex items center justify between, and wrap these two so that it sits across like this. And then what I can do is increase the text size on these. So I can say text extra large, they're nice and big. And then I can, on a small screen, say, well, actually first let's just see what it looks like on a big screen. So if I come across, we see that breaks into two sides. We have that information over there. What I just want is the price to come underneath the name. So we're just going to say on a medium screen, flex column. That's all centered. And so now we just want to say medium items. We'll get rid of that. Medium items start. Is that going to put them over the side? That it absolutely does. And on a medium screen, I'm also going to drop this size down. So I'll say text large. So we should have, honestly, we could even just say text base. So if we just look at that, we have the price. We'll actually just need a gap in here as well. Match the gap from above. The premium apple, premium pineapple, $1,000. And then we have the thing down there. And then the last thing we're going to do is have a button. So this is going to be a button that just says add to cart. Nice and simple. We're going to give this a class of background slate 700, text white hover, BG slate 500, and a cursor pointer. And we're also going to give it a margin left of auto so that it pushes itself to the right. And we're also going to give it a padding X of 4 and a padding Y of 2. So now we have a little add to cart button. And what I'm just going to do is give this paragraph a flex of 1 so that it just pushes the add to cart to the bottom down over there. And so now if we come onto a smaller page, everything looks nice and neat. We can do that. We can go home. We can click on the Orchard of Apples. We have the Orchard of Apples. We have the description, all the information. looks like we might just want to add some padding to the top of this component. So we can say padding 4. That's just going to push it down a little bit. And once again, if I come onto a small screen, that looks great. So that's super good. The next thing we're going to do is just quickly style the footer. So for the footer, we can just come back into this layout file just here. Also, the one thing we should note is that the layout has also wrapped these sub pages. So that is just super convenient. You can actually define sub layouts inside of this second directory that will be applied preferentially, but we're just going to use this one overall layout. And in here, we're going to give this footer a class of flex, items, center, flex, wrap, justify, center, border top, border solid, and border slate 300. We're also going to give it a padding Y of, or just a padding in general of 10. So that should come up down the bottom. There we have our little footer. And inside the footer, we're going to come to Font Awesome Icons. And we're just going to have an Instagram link. So if we come over to Instagram, just here, we can copy this little component, paste it inside of our footer. Make sure we change class to class name, just like that. We'll give it a text slate 700, a hover text slate 500, and a cursor pointer because people need to be able to click on it. And we can just see that come up down the bottom. It's pretty sleek. We'll obviously want to bump up a size, so we'll say text 2XL. That's just going to be a little bit larger, so that looks all right. Maybe on a small screen, I'll say text 3XL, and on a medium screen, we'll say text 4XL. And I might just drop the padding of this down to a 4. All right, maybe a 6. No, we'll do 4, and then on a medium screen, we'll do padding 8. So that's just like that, looking pretty good. The other thing we're going to do is just wrap this icon inside of the link tag. So the capital L, we'll have to make sure that's imported up the top. And we're just going to give this an href equals to whatever your Instagram is. So mine's https://www.instagram.com/smalljames. Close that component. And now when we click on that, we would expect to be routed to the Instagram, which we are, so that's all good. And we might also just add the target equals underscore blank so that that gets opened up in a new tab. So that's going to open that up in a new tab instead of changing anything here. So that's nice. And so that's our footer all done. The last thing we're going to do is actually make this add to cart functionality work properly. So we're going to have to set this to a state, and that is going to be inside of our product page just here. So we're going to define a function, or even better, we're actually going to access the store that we defined. So we set this add item to cart state just here. We're going to come into the product, and just how we access the product, we're going to access that function. Pretty typical convention to just keep the names consistent to what you've saved them inside of the store. So now we can access this add item to cart, and we can create a function here that just says handle add to cart. And in here we can say const, let's see what it expects. So this expects a new item. So we will just say const new item is equal to open that up. And we're going to give it a quantity and a price ID. So in this case, we're just going to do the quantity of 1, and the price ID is going to be equal to the price ID from above. So that should be super simple. And now we can just say add item to cart and pass in that new item inside of an object. And then our store method will destructure it and set it to our cart. Now that should be cool. On adding the item to the cart, we're going to have to make sure that the header updates and that we have a little badge displayed on our header. And so what I'm going to do in here is actually create a new component in the root level, and it's just going to be called header.js. We're going to make it a typical React component, and at the top we're going to put use client, just like that. And in here we're going to move this header logic from here and paste it as the returned value from this header. We'll have to make sure that we do in fact import the link tag. But that's pretty easy. And now we can just render out the header, import that component right there. So it's right there. And we can have that all working. And what that's going to allow us to do is come into the header component just here, and we can now access the cart item. So we're going to say cart items is equal to use cart, import our store, access the state, and return the state.cart. And what we can do is we can wrap our icon inside of a div. We'll give the div a class of position, relative, grid, and place items center, so that everything is perfectly centered within the page. And then we can have a secondary div, and we can conditionally render it. So if cart items.length is greater than 0, and we render out this component. So it's some conditional logic. If this is true, then render out the value in here. And this is going to be a div with a class absolute, top of 0, right of 0. Close that div. And in here, what we can do is just have a paragraph tag that has cart items.length. So that should typically say 0. I might just give this a background of blue 400 and a text white and a rounded full, so that it's fully rounded. Let's save that. We'll see if that appears up the top. Currently it's 0. Let's see if I just change this to true temporarily. We can see that we get that 0 appearing just there. That obviously looks trash, so we can fix that by saying class text extra small. That puts it up the top. Maybe small is better. Okay, small is pretty good, and we're also going to want us to set an aspect square on this and give it a height of maybe 4. That almost worked. And in here we also want to give this a grid and place items center, so that the text is centered within that little bubble. And it looks like this might need to be a 6. So there we have the little badge. We could possibly bring this text size up to base. That looks fine too. And now we just want to translate this absolute element. So we're going to say minus translate y full minus translate x full. So that should move it off to the side, and this shouldn't be minus translate, it should be a positive translate x. So that we can see that that's where it's placing up here. That's maybe a little bit far, and I might just bring that down to 5 and small. We might try changing this to half instead of full. And now we can see that we have that little cart item badge, and we can go back to having cart items.length there is greater than 0. So now what we would expect to happen with all of those changes is for us to go into an item, add it to our cart, and our cart value to update. Let's see if I come back. Does that happen? No, that does not. And so we're just going to console.log cart items, and that is still an empty array. Cart items is still an empty array. We add and we're not getting anything. So our add button is currently not working. And that's because we actually haven't assigned the function to the button. So we're going to say on click and just have handle add cart in there. So now when I click handle add cart, we can see that it does in fact update that little badge, and we can add loads of items to our cart. So that's absolutely smashing. That's what it looks like on a small screen. So we might just come into our store, our little badge, and make it so that the text size is on a smaller or bigger screen. We'll also give this on a smaller or bigger screen, and we'll set the default to 4 and the text size to extra small. So now on a mobile screen, it's just going to still look too big. Let's keep the height the same. We'll just change the text size. So that's better. That's just going to say 26. And then on a bigger screen, it also looks decent. If anything, we could probably bring the height up. Small height 6. And there's our little badge. We also just want to make sure that this has pointer events none. So that's just not going to do anything. And we also want to give this whole cart, this item here, the cursor pointer, and we want to move this, we want to change this to a group hover effect. And this is going to have group in here, and so this is also going to have group. Well, actually, that's probably fine. So group just means it listens to the parent hover state, and so if we hover over anything in this, it will change that opacity. So that is hunky-dory. Now that we have the ability to add items to our cart, we obviously need a modal to display them, and so we're going to create a new component. It's going to be modal.js. In here we can go RFC to create the modal. This is going to be a client-side modal, so we can say use client up the top. And what we're going to have to do to make this modal work is we're going to have to come into our layout file just here, and where we have this body, we're going to have to make a new div down the bottom, and this is going to have an ID equal to portal, just like that, and that's just going to be an empty div. Now what we can do inside, let's just close a couple of these pages. We don't need that, we don't need that. Don't need the page, don't need the product card. We need that's fine for the layout. We'll need the header, and we'll need the modal. And in here what we're going to do is import React DOM, just there, from React. And this is actually not the correct import. It's going to be React DOM, lowercase om, and that's going to be from React DOM, just like that. And this is going to return React DOM.create portal. And in here we provide the JSX that gets rendered, and under this we access the document.getElementById, and we target the portal, and that says where to create the portal. So essentially how that works is if I have some content in here, let's see, where is modal? If we come into the elements of the page, we look, here's the body, let's close the body. We're actually at the bottom of the body, we would expect to have a secondary div, and we can see it way down there, div ID of portal, and that currently doesn't have any content in it, and that's because we're not rendering out the modal, but as soon as we render this modal component, we would expect that to come up on the page. And so I'm just going to render it in here under the top, and I'm going to first say const open modal is equal to use cart state, and we're going to return the open modal. We're going to return state.open modal because I believe that's what we called it in our store. This variable just here, I might set it true by default for the second, so we can access that. And then we're going to say open modal if it's true, and return the modal component that we have defined. So we can import that and close that off. So that should currently be true, and we would expect modal to show up at the bottom of the screen, so it does. And so that means that this portal is working correctly, but since we rendered it in relation to the body of our document, what we can do is give it some cool styles. So we can say class absolute fixed top of 0, left of 0, width is going to be the screen, so we'll say 100 view width. Width screen, we'll say height of the screen, just like that. And we could say background slate 900, and we would expect that now to cover our entire page. We can see that it covers almost all of the entire page. We'll also give it a Z of 50 because it needs to sit above everything. And so that is currently working, and this should also be fixed so that it always sits on the page. And now all we can see is the modal, and the modal is working perfectly. So that is cool. This should not have a background of slate like that. In here, what we're going to do is have a first div, and this is going to have a class of background transparent and an inset of 0, so that it occupies the entire parent container, so absolute and inset of 0. And this is going to be used to close the modal. And then after that, we're going to have a div, and this is actually going to have the contents of the modal. So we'll say class flex col gap 4. and maybe a padding of 4. In here we can have a div that just says h1 cart, just like that. We can go ahead and grab an icon, so we'll just grab the close icon. We just want the X. Where's the X? The X mark right here. We'll copy that X mark into our document, make sure we update the class name to xmart. And so if we look at our cart, we can see that popping up just over there. We want to give this element a background of white. We're also going to position it absolute and at the right of 0 and the top 0. We're going to give it a height of screen so that it occupies the full screen height, and we're also going to give it a shadow, so now we can really start to see the cart over here. And what I'm going to do is on a small screen give it a width of the screen, and then on anything larger than a small screen I'm just going to set the width to 96, but give it a max width of screen, just like that. So that should actually do it. Here we have our cart. As we come into a small screen, it occupies the full screen width, and then as we come out, it just takes up what it needs. So that's looking decent. I might also just give it a shadow large, just so it's very obvious that it's on top of everything. And now we can give this div here a class of flex items center justify between. Now we have the cart at the top and the little close. I'm going to upgrade these to text extra large so they're a bit bigger. I'm also going to give this a position of relative, and in here I'm going to create another div with a class name equal to absolute bottom 0 left half minus translate x half. So this is going to center it horizontally. We're going to give it a height of a custom amount. So we use the square parentheses of 1 pixel, a background of slate 300, and let's see if that shows up. That doesn't, so what are we missing? Background, bottom, we have to set a width, and so the width is going to be 2/3 of the parent element. So now we have this little line down the bottom there. I'm also just going to boost the padding of this element just here and remove it from there. So this is going to say padding 4, so that's, you could even make that bigger, maybe padding of 6. Now we have the little line down the bottom underneath the cart. We're going to access the store handler, the open modal handler in here. So we're going to say const close modal is equal to use cart. We'll access the state and we will return state dot the value, so set open modal. What we're going to do is this will occupy, invisibly. Let's just actually set this to background green 200. We can see that that occupies everywhere that's not the cart and it sits underneath. So we're going to listen to any events that click on this background window here, and if they click out of the cart, it's going to close the cart. So we can set that back to background transparent, just like that. So now it's invisible, but we can set on click is equal to, and we're just going to call close modal, and that is going to just be that right there. Let's make sure that's spelled modal, not model. And the other thing we're going to do is just come into our store and set the default value of this modal to false so that it doesn't originally display. And now our page is working, and that is all well and good. And we're also just going to come into the header. Well, actually, first let's just finish this. So we've closed the modal on the click of the backdrop. We're also going to close the modal on click of this icon. So anything inside of here. So we're going to say on click is equal to close modal. So that will also close the modal if they click on the X button. We might also just give that a cursor pointer and a hover opacity 60 should be sweet. And we also want to now come into our header and make sure that when they click on the cart or anything in this div that it opens the modal. So in here we already have access to the open modal, so now we'll just add the on click here, open modal, that is a function that should open our modal. So now if we try that, we click and we get an error, and that's because that is actually the value of open modal, that's not the function. So that's my bad. This should instead be set open modal. So we could say handle open modal and just access the set of, well, honestly, we could just call them the same thing. So that's the function that we'll actually want to pass down, not the actual state value. So if I refresh that page, let's do that again. We load our store, we click on the cart opens up. We click off the cart, it closes. We click on it, click the X, it also closes, but if we click anywhere else, it does not. We can also access the cart from other pages, so that is working well, and it's totally responsive, so that is amazing. Now what we want to do is add items to our cart and have them rendered out inside of the modal. So here what we'll do is we'll say const cart items is equal to use cart state, and we will return the state .cart. And now for all the items, we want to basically just make it look all pretty, and we can do that by coming under here and having a div, and we're going to have a conditional display that says cart items .length is equal to 0. If it is, we're going to render out one thing, and if it's not, then we'll render out something else. If it is, we're going to render out a paragraph that says there is nothing in your cart, maybe a sad face. And if it's not true, then we're going to map over all of the elements, and we will return this inside of React fragments so that React is happy. And in here we can say cart items .map cart item. We'll also make sure we access the index, so we can say item index, open that up, and in here we can return a div that has the key equal to the item index. And for the minute we could just say cart item. Let's see what we you see, the issue is currently what we're doing is when we're setting it, we're only setting the price ID and the quantity, whereas we actually need the name as well. And honestly, we could probably get there. So let's just make sure that when we have the add to cart, so that's in here, add to cart handler, we'll also make sure that we set the name so that we can access the name. So that is chill. We should be able to render out the name just there. We'll come back and style this in a second. Let's refresh the page, start again. We come to our home page, we click on the orchard of apples, we add the item to our cart. We can now see it's available for us. Absolutely amazing. If I refresh this page quickly, we'll start from square one. We come to the home page, we click on the bunch of bananas, and we come to our cart. We have nothing in the cart. We add the item, totally responsive. Zustand is amazing. So that is beautiful. Now what we want to do is style these items. So we're just going to make sure that this here has a class of padding of 4, a display of flex column, gap of 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to give each of these cart items something a bit more special than this. So it's basically just going to, actually while I'm on it, I'm just going to make sure that we set the cost as well. That way we can calculate a total cost, which I think will be super useful. But in here we can just have the h1 with the cart item.name. We can give this a class of flex col gap 2. We can also wrap this inside of a div just here that has class flex item center justify between, and that way what we can do is we can have the price up here, so we can just have $ cart item dot cost and make sure we have to divide that by 1,000 as per usual. So that should display all of that underneath both of these items. So this div just here, what we'll do is we'll access the quantity, and so that will just say 1. So we'll have a paragraph that says quantity, and that can just be I don't know, one of them. And honestly, that should be just about it. So here we have our little entry. What I'm just going to do is come back into the code just here and give this a border left border solid border slate 700. So that should just show up on the side. We'll probably want to just give this a padding of 2 so it's in. So here we have the item, we don't have the cost, yes, and we have the quantity. And so I'm just going to give this a class of text slate 600 and text small so that it sits a little bit smaller than the remainder. And coming back in here, I'm just going to make this a px of 2 so that it's just like that. So here we have our little item. If I come back to the home screen and start again, we can go into our product. We can click add to cart. That shows up. We can see that we have the cost, and we could come back home. That's still going to be in our cart, so that's nice. We could now come into the pineapples. We can add the pineapple to our cart, and then we have the premium pineapple and the orchard of apples. So that is hunky-dory. What we're going to do to add on to this modal is, after all of this stuff here, we're going to give this an overflow of scroll. This whole container has a flex col and occupies the entire height of the screen. So we're going to give this a flex of 1 as well. And underneath this div right here, we're going to have a final div that just says checkout. So it's going to be class name equal to border solid border slate 700, text extra large, and in here we'll just say checkout. So if I come over to the modal, that's down the bottom just there. You can see that. We're going to give it a padding of, actually we'll give it a margin of 4, so that pushes it in a little bit. We'll give it a padding of 8, so that it's nice and big. Maybe 6 is enough, and I'm going to make it font semi-bold. No, I'm not going to do that. It's going to stay the same font, but we are going to make it uppercase, and we're going to give it a grid and place items center so that the text is in the center. Now we have a nice little checkout button, and we're just going to say hover opacity 50, 60 cursor pointer. And now that's just going to be our little checkout button. So honestly, that's pretty much our whole application working, which is super excellent, really nice. Everything is super responsive. If we come down onto a mobile screen, everything looks good. We can access the cart, we can close the cart, everything works really well. The last thing we're going to do now is actually configure the checkout, which we are going to do using this API route just here, hello, and currently they have this one little route. So NextJS obviously serves up a Node.js backend, and that's what we're going to be doing in here. And so we are going to start off by inside of, well, actually we're just going to delete this to first things first. Delete that. That's all gone. And we are now going to make a new folder called API, and inside of API we are going to create a file called checkout.js. So this is going to be a backend route, and in here what we're going to do is export an asynchronous function get, and we're going to access the request, and what we're going to say is return new response. So it's pretty similar to what we've had before, hello. So that's going to do for now, except that's a complete lie. We will do that in a second. And above this, the first thing we're going to do is start off by accessing the body of the post route. So this is actually going to need to be a post route. We're going to say const body is equal to json.pass request.body. So we're going to pass the body of the request, and we're going to say if body.line items, which is a thing that we're going to create, .length is equal to 0, then we're going to return a new response of hello and a status of 403. And I think we should actually be able to access the res just here response. So we could actually use a typical method instead. So we might actually just return res.send status 405. Let's see if that works. If we do actually have items, we're going to say a try and catch block. In here, we're going to make sure we catch any errors, and we'll console.log broked. we're going to try to initialize stripe. So stripe is equal to new stripe. Import that up the top. We're going to do what we have done before and just say process.env.secret key. Stripe secret, actually, that's what it is. Double question mark and then the backup. And we're going to do just like we did before and pass in the API version, which is 2020.08.27. Technically, there's nothing stopping you from doing a newer Stripe version. Now what we're going to do is define a session. So the session is equal to await stripe.checkout.sessions.create. In here, we're going to provide a success URL, which is going to be https or p//localhost 3000/success. We'll also define a cancel URL. Make sure we have a comma in between them. So we'll have to create these routes in a second. We're also going to provide the line items, which is going to be body.line items. And finally, we're going to have the mode, which is going to be payment. And then we're just going to return res.status 201.json, and we're going to send back the session just like that. If it doesn't work, then we're going to say res.sendStatus 500 and console.log the error, I think. So that should be pretty good for our backend route, which is awesome. Now we're going to have to construct this from our modal. So in here, what I'm going to do is create an asynchronous function called checkout. Pretty easy. And what we're going to do is construct the line items. And that is going to be const line items is equal to products, cart items dot map. We'll get the cart item, open that up, and in here what we're going to do is return an object that has the price ID. So that is going to be cart item, that's just going to be price is equal to price cart item dot price ID, and then we're just going to set the quantity to 1. So it's going to be the line items. After that, what we're going to do is we're going to say const res is equal to await fetch, and we're going to go to /API/checkout. I'm going to open that up and pass in some options. So open that up in curly parentheses. We're going to set the method to post. We're going to set the body to json.stringify, and in here we're just going to have the line items object, and then after that we're going to say const data is equal to await res.json, access that JSON, and then we're just going to use the use router. So we'll import that. We'll say const router is equal to use router. Make sure that gets imported from next navigation. And now we can just say router.push the success URL. So that's going to be data.session.url, just like that. So that should be just about everything that we need to check if that's working. We'll just need to assign this to the checkout just here. We'll say onClick is equal to the function checkout. So let's give that a shot. We have our 3 items. We click checkout. We get an error. We can go look at what the problem is by checking the network tab. Here we can see we got a 404 which says not found, and that didn't work. So what I'm just going to do is change this to a handler function just like that. And we're also going to add in some code up the top that just checks the method. So above this here, we're just going to say if request.method is not equal to post, then we're just going to return res.status 405. And that's going to be send status 405. So let's just go ahead and rerun everything. We will refresh our page entirely. We'll come home, refresh our everything. We'll load in our products. We will add a product to our cart. We have an item in our cart. Let's just really expand this open wide. So we can see the network request. Let's hit checkout. Once again, we get 404. And the reason that's not working is because that actually needs to be renamed route. So what we're going to do is create a new folder in here, and this is going to be called checkout. And inside of checkout, we're going to create a new file called route.js. Copy all of this code into route.js. Paste that in there, and then delete this file. So it's the same thing, except now we should also be able to come back and just define that as post and comment this code out just there. So that should now do the trick. We've restarted that. We get the 500 server error, so that is progress. And if we look on the back end, we get a nice error log, and it's a JSON issue. So we should be able to look at the payload. We have the quantity 1. We didn't get any line items, so that's a problem. So for whatever reason, the price didn't add. So let's just make sure that when we add that to our thing, handle item, price ID. Did I spell that correctly? Price ID, that is correct. We could even console.log cart item. Let's just take a look at what it is. We will come over to our console. Let's hit checkout. We get this information. It doesn't have a price ID. So the price ID is obviously undefined. And so that is an issue inside of our modal that we can also take a look at. So let's just here, we'll console.log cart items. Make sure that comes up properly. We come in here, we look at the cart item, and we can see that the price ID is still undefined. So that's an issue with how it's being set. And that is getting set from the page.javascript. So handle in cart, this is not working. Price ID, price ID, price ID. Let's try setting it like that, and we'll also console.log price ID, price ID. Let's see if that works. And that is the issue. We actually need to make sure that we destructure the price ID from the search params. That is the issue that I was having there. So if we come back home, refresh this page, back to square one, we add that to our cart, we now have access to the price ID, and we should be able to check that out. We still get an error. Let's just go and take a look at that. We can have a look at the network request for this too. So there we have access to the price IDs inside of line items and the quantities, so that is perfect. And it looks like it's not enjoying passing the body, so let's just console.log request.body. We might not even need to pass it potentially. Let's just try that once more. That's restarted. Let's check out. And now if we take a look, we can see that it's a readable stream. And let's just make sure that when we send that out from our modal, that we also just set the content type. So we will say headers, and we'll say content type is equal to application/JSON, because it seems to be reading as the wrong type of information. So we'll refresh that, send that once more. What error did we get? And this is giving us problems because I'm a Muppet. What we actually want to do is await request.json so we can access it that way. That's going to give us the body of the document. Then we have the line items, and now we have a secondary problem, which is that res.sendStatus is not a valid response. And so we're going to go ahead and use their style of response, which is just going to be this new response. And we can just say error. We can give back a 405, just like that. And we can copy and paste that wherever we send back a status, which is just here. So let's give that a shot. And as for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to return next response just here. So that will need to be imported up the top from next server. And we are just going to pass in some JSON, and that is going to contain the session, just like that. So let's make sure that's restarted. We'll give that one more shot. And that totally works. So now we can go, James, this actually isn't going to work for the second because we're quickly going to have to create a new file with a success route, and that's going to need page.javascript, and in here we can say export default function success page, we can just return a div that contains a link that just says back home. We can give this an href equals the slash, and we can also just say nice. And we can do the exact same with our cancel route. So page.javascript export default function cancel page, return link, just same as before, back home, and we'll wrap that inside of a div that says gutted. Easy breezy. So now that's all working. If we go ahead and just say banana@test.com, we can use all the test information that they give us. Hello noodle, and we should be able to pay. We get a successful checkout, and now we get routed back to the home of the fruit store, and that purchase has been successfully made. So we can click back home, that takes us back home. And honestly, Bob's your uncle, you have a full stack application just like that. So once again, just to show how it works, we can click on the bananas, add the bananas to the cart, check out the bananas, we get taken through to a checkout page specific to the bananas. We can say test2@gmail.com, use the test info, all of it. And it's just absolute magic. Totally works. Fully functional e-commerce store. And well done. That's pretty much it, my friends. You have absolutely nailed this tutorial. We are at the end. You have a fully functional e-commerce store. We've used TailwindCSS, all the latest and greatest of NextJS 13. We have used their API endpoints, their routes and stuff like that. We've looked at how we can do state management with Zustand. Absolutely massive tutorial, and I'm proud of you guys for getting here. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and sub. Super appreciate it, and it helps me make more tutorials like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.